Rev it up and welcome to Cars Yeah, show number 2530. Be prepared to be inspired.
This is Cars Yeah, where you'll enjoy interviews with inspiring automotive enthusiasts. I'm founder Mark Greene, and I've handed the keys to this car over to Ginger Baker Rust, who's a lifelong enthusiast. Ginger's here to provide you with a fuel injection of automotive inspiration. So get in, sit down, and buckle up and get ready for a fun ride here on Cars Yeah.
Hello, inspiring automotive enthusiasts, and welcome to Cars Yeah. Today we are in the beautiful city of London, England, with a very esteemed guest by the name of Miranda Seymour. Hello, Miranda, and welcome to Cars Yeah. Do you have it in gear, and are you ready to release the clutch?
I certainly am, Ginger.
Well, it's great to have you on today. Miranda, please share something about yourself that most people may not know.
Ooh, now that's an interesting one. I think maybe quite a lot of Americans are listening to this. And so I think what I would like to share is that although I live in London and I sound about as English as one possibly could, I actually met my beloved husband on a home swap in Boston, Massachusetts. And he was living in the very room out there where I had lived with my previous husband. He had come in as a tenant. I was looking for somewhere to go and write a book. And I wanted to be out of England because it was all about my mother. And I was living with my mother, so I need to be somewhere else. So the landlady arranged a home swap. And we never met. We met each other's rooms. And he came to my London flat, fell in love with all my books and my records and my piano music. And I did exactly the same in his room. And a month later, we met. And a month after that, we were married.
Oh, that is fascinating. So you have a music room.
Sort of, yeah. I have a lovely room. Well, in the country, I have a room that has a spinet in it, which is something really special. But in the flat that I'm in London, I just have a kind of electronic piano, which I love.
Well, the reason why I ask is I actually have a room in my home that's specifically for music, for all of our music, our instruments, our pianos, guitars. So I find that kind of interesting. What a fascinating story on how you met your husband.
Funny you say that, because actually this wonderful house I was talking about, I think of it as the Magic House in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It belonged to a conductor. And so that house was always, all the time I lived there, full of music. And you'd have people like Yo-Yo Ma coming to breakfast. It was amazing. Wonderful place.
Sounds wonderful. I would love that. Let me tell you a little bit about Miranda. Today is a very exciting show for me as I have the opportunity to speak with one of my favorite authors, Miranda Seymour, the author of my favorite book, The Bugatti Queen, who writes the story of one of my favorite racers, Helle Nice. I have asked Mark Greene, the founder of Cars Yeah, to co-host with me today. Miranda Seymour is a celebrated biographer, novelist, memoir writer, and critic, and has been a visiting professor at Nottingham Trent University. She is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, as well as a Royal Literary Fund fellow, and the author of the award-winning memoir, In My Father's House. Her many acclaimed biographies include A Ring of Conspirators, an innovative study of Henry James and his literary circle, Ottoline Morrell, Life on a Grand Scale, Robert Graves, Life on the Edge, Mary Shelley, In Byron's Wake, and The Bugatti Queen. And I Used to Live Here Once, The Haunted Life of Rhys. So let's take a ride with Miranda. Let's go a little deeper into the corner and share with us more about your journey to becoming a best-selling author. It is a great way to get the inspirational tires turning on Cars Yeah. So Miranda, take the wheel.
I'll try to do that, Ginger. Gosh, well, that is one long journey. I think that if I told you the whole journey, we would be here all night. So I would begin by saying that when I really discovered what kind of a writer I was by the time I'd written about 4 biographies. And I thought, this is interesting. I always seem to write about these wonderful women who have been neglected or undervalued or mocked or something like that. I wonder why. It's really strange. I'm always drawn to them. Then I thought, well, I think I accept this. This is the writer I am. I am the champion of women who should be better known. And nobody fits that category better than the wonderful Helle Nice.
Yes, reading about her in your book, I absolutely could relate to her and her struggles and a lot of things that she went through. And it's just an absolutely amazing story. What made you to decide to write about Helle Nice?
That was an extraordinary thing. It's only happened to me twice in my life. It's happened with the book I'm writing now, which is about an amazing Russian surgeon, where the great-grandson suddenly turned up and said, I've got a story for you. And I said, oh, no, because he was always offering me stories. Go away. I don't want to hear another story. And then he started to tell me. And after about 5 minutes, he said, you haven't stopped me yet. And I said, no, because I'm going to write it. And it was exactly the same with Helle Nice. A friend of mine came to stay and he barely jumped out of his car before he held up this big photograph. And it's actually the very photograph that is on the front of the Bugatti Queen, of this glorious woman perched on the back of her car with her arms folded, looking at the camera. And she just looks as though she's on top of the world. It's 1931. She's just won a race. And I looked at it and I thought, I have got to write about you. So that was where it began. And then after that, my friend gave me the very frustrating news that, in fact, he knew nothing about her at all. He had long, long ago bought 2 scrapbooks in a kind of car boot sale near Nice. So I guess she might have died somewhere near Nice. He had sold the scrapbooks to somebody who turned out by then to have acquired her Bugatti, which I then got to drive just outside New York in New Jersey. But meanwhile, I had to literally go on foot, plodding about in France, looking for where my heroine had lived, where she'd come from, a tiny little village not far from Paris, why she'd ended up in Nice, living not in a glamorous place, but in a terrible, sordid back street, where she was even seen by a neighbor. Nobody ever believes this, but it's true, going out early in the morning in a leopard skin coat and drinking milk from the cat's saucers. She was that poor. And she'd been as rich as you can imagine. And a jealous rival called Louis Chiron, who everybody has forgotten now and everybody knows about her, which I just love. Things came right in the end. He really hated her because he would win the races. And Helle Nice, who was so gorgeous looking and terribly good at publicity, would be there perched on her car, getting all the publicity. And when the war had happened, Louis Chiron came from Monaco and he invited Helle Nice, who was French, to come to Monaco. Different rules, different countries. While they were in Monaco, he had helped set up the Monte Carlo rally, so he was really powerful. He pointed at her in front of all the racing drivers from all over Europe who'd assembled there. This was 1949. And he said, that woman should not be here. She is a Gestapo collaborator. Well, at that moment, she'd never, one of the many interesting things about Helle Nice is, unlike all the other women in racing then, she never had any money of her own. She just made it on wit, on determination, on skill, on occasionally on boyfriends who had a bit of money, whatever, and on sponsorship. Well, of course, what happens if you're called a Gestapo collaborator in 1949 is that the sponsors just run for their lives. She was dropped and she ended up living in the back room of a charitable association called, rather wonderfully, the Turning Wheel, but it was the Turning Wheel of Fate. It was a charity for people who'd been in, I know, dancing or on the stage. And Helle Nice started life as a striptease dancer before she became a Bugatti driver. So they had rescued her, and that was what she went to. And being her, she then got really bored living in a back room at the charity in Paris. So she scarpered with the charity's only car, left a note saying, sorry, I took it, but I'm going to make really good speed. And she drove all the way down from Paris to Nice with the car and set herself up there.
Wow.
I have a question. How did this life she had, and especially not having money to self-finance, how did she even become a driver? Where did that
Good
first
question.
moment happen?
Exactly. No, it's a very, very good question, Mark. What happened was that she was being a very pretty, very seductive, very sexy dancer with loads and loads of boyfriends. She was fantastically seductive and erotic, and her dances were done with a tiny bit of clothing on, but I mean, as little as you wouldn't notice. And so everybody adored her. And one of her boyfriends took her along to this little shop for mechanics that was run by a lovely man called Henri de Courcelles, who'd been in the First World War as a pilot. And like many of the pilots, after the war was over, they didn't go flying anymore. They got into racing. He'd become a racing driver. And he was the one who she first started going to watch him racing and then got him to teach her how to drive. And then, as if by magic, she was in a competition in Paris that was called something like the Concours d'Elegance that we have today. It was a kind of beauty competition for beautiful women driving beautiful cars. And there was she with some beautiful French car. And she was spotted by a member of the Bugatti family just when they were looking for somebody to market their brand new T35C, beautiful, beautiful blue Bugatti. And they thought that they'd found her, and they had.
Right place, right time.
Right. And I think what's interesting too is they looked at her, I think at first, to be just someone that could market for them.
Exactly.
And they were so surprised when they put her behind the wheel and then actually figured out that she was a remarkable race car driver.
And how did she learn to be a good race car driver? That's my next, because I mean, there's an innate talent to some great drivers, but still, and those cars back then were not easy cars to drive.
She was a very, very strong woman. Someone last night was saying to me, look at those biceps. And she always wore these short sleeves with little bows on. So you can see, she must have been quite proud of her biceps. They weren't kind of great beefy biceps, but you can see how strong she was. And you're absolutely right, Mark, because I had the tremendous privilege of driving her car. And by the end of, I don't know, an hour of driving, I was absolutely terrified out of my wits because the owner had told me what it was worth. And I was feeling absolutely ill with terror in case I crashed it or something. B, I was experiencing exactly what it was like to drive a racing car back in the early 1930s when your thigh was right up against the, God, what would it be? Sorry.
Exhaust pipe, probably.
No, I didn't know. In the middle of the car, they had a kind of hot bit right.
Oh, the transmission tunnel. The drivetrain. Yeah.
Great. So when I was driving it, my left leg was right up against the transmission tunnel.
Yeah.
And so that was absolutely burning. I had a great red mark on my leg for a week afterwards. I hadn't realized that the gears were actually on the outside of the car. So you'd have to kind of lean out to do them. And they would make this terrifying noise because they didn't have any kind of wonderful oils.
No synchro mesh.
Exactly, no synchro mesh at all. And so you'd hear this terrifying screech each time you changed gear. And no wing mirrors, because that was kind of sissy. They didn't bother with that kind of thing. And the other thing that I found really scary about driving that car was, I'm not sure if it was the same in her day, but when I was driving it, you could actually see the road. When you look down between your feet, if you dare take your eyes off the road for a second, because you're really low down and you feel like you're going 1,000,000 miles an hour, you can see the road racing by underneath you. But the thing about it was, and I've never forgotten this sense of incredible balance between absolute exhilaration, like the best moment you ever had in your life, and being absolutely certain that you're going to die. And you're just poised between the two. And when I got out of it, I was just laughing, this high-pitched laugh, like, oh my God, I'm alive. I don't believe it. I was so happy. It was wonderful.
You are very fortunate to drive a car like that. I'm familiar with those, having seen them at concours events and car events and things. And I've had a friend that used to race one, actually. But wow. How did you get so lucky to be invited to drive someone's car like that?
Well, what I did find was that there's a whole world of vintage car drivers out there who are incredibly kind. And so, a wonderful man whose name I'll put out there because I mean, he was the one who taught me how to look into under the hood of a Bugatti and understand that the architecture of it was like a cathedral with pipes. It's absolutely beautiful. So, I learned to kind of read what was there. But he also took me, Charles Dean, in case I forgot to say his name, sweet man, very, very good Bugatti racer himself. He took me to a place called Prescott, which anybody listening in England will know about. I don't know in America, but the Bugatti heartland. It's the place that Ettore Bugatti himself came to. And when I was there, I had, I think, the most amazing moment in a Bugatti I ever had, because there was a woman there that day with a Bugatti Royale. Now, the Royale was the car that Ettore Bugatti made really for people like kings and emperors. Ordinary people like you and me weren't allowed to drive them, and we couldn't have afforded them. And it's massive, absolutely massive. Well, at Prescott, there's a hill, and it's very famous. It's called the Prescott Hill Climb, and it's very steep and it's very windy. So the sweet lady, Angela Hurka, sitting in the Bugatti Royale, said, well, would you like a ride? Well, would I? Absolutely. So I got in, and Angela and I had a good chat about the Bugatti Queen, my favorite subject, as I'm sure you realize by now. And then after a bit, I said, well, when are you going to take me up the hill? And she said, we're at the top of it. And I said, what? And I mean, it's a car that is so huge. It had traveled to the top of this impossible hill so smoothly, I didn't even know I'd left the bottom.
Wow. Have you had the pleasure of visiting the Schlumpf collection of Bugattis in Mulhouse, France?
Yes, I have. I have. It's wonderful.
Isn't it? It's an amazing place. Yeah.
It's, well, I've even had recently the even, dare I say, greater pleasure of opening an exhibition, which is all about Helle Nice for a year. It's on there at an amazing new museum in Germany called the Mack Museum near Stuttgart in Singen. And it's been newly designed by a wonderful couple, well, for a wonderful couple who evidently have a lot of money and a great deal of love of cars. And it's two separate buildings, which they have filled with these fabulous machines that they've been collecting since the 70s, including Bugattis and Ferraris and Panhards and I don't know, Delages, I mean, you name it, and every vintage car you ever dreamed of is there. And they host these fabulous exhibitions.
Wow.
So that was a big treat for me.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Well, I have a quick question. When you think about this book, what is one thing that you would like a reader to garner from this, reading this book about this wonderful woman?
Ooh, I think I would. Helle Nice has so many lessons to offer. And it tends to be the case when I write about these amazing women. I feel they've given at least as much to me as I've tried to give to them, because I do learn from their examples. And I do find that they become, in the case of Ottoline Morrell, a moral touchstone. In the case of Mary Shelley, who lost 5 children and had to live with a husband who was just a devil to live with, wonderful poet. I think that was a lesson in absolute loyalty and courage. And I think the lesson that Helle Nice offers is courage, perseverance, and boldness. She was so brave. And no French woman before her had ever dared to take up an invitation to go out to America and ride on the speedboats, which I mean, when I have to say, when I began writing this book, I didn't know anything about cars at all. I had a deux chevaux. I'd never driven a racing car. I didn't know anything. And when I started reading about what it was like to ride on those speedboats, and something like 6 people would often die in a single race. Well, I'll tell you one little story about Helle Nice that tells you her courage. Was that she was driving at one of these petrifying speedboats, and the managers had told her that she must be sure to acknowledge a driver, a very famous driver, I can't remember his name now, who had recently died there, maybe 2 weeks before. So she must make some acknowledgement. So she did. She drove her car right up onto the edge of the speed bowl to wave a handkerchief in the air at the spot where he had died. And the car turned over. And everybody thought that she had had it. And there was a kind of hush that fell over the whole place. But being Helle Nice, she crawled out from the wreckage and she ran back down the speedboat towards the crowds, just laughing and waving this little handkerchief in her hand.
Gosh. Wow.
And that's the kind of woman she was.
Wow. There you go.
Yeah, I found it so amazing that you have listed in the back of the book numerous speed records and race records that she set all over the world, in America, in Europe, in Brazil, in South America. And not only did she, as you referred to them as speed bowls, which we refer to them as dirt tracks here.
Yes.
But she raced at some of the most prestigious dirt tracks here in the United States. She was sponsored by Lucky Strike.
Exactly. And she was the absolute darling of her colleagues on the racetrack because they'd never seen anything like her before. And I think they were just bowled over by her charm and her courage. She just didn't seem ever to feel fear, ever.
Yes. And that's so crazy because you're right. She had so much courage and charisma, but the talent, I mean, when you read the records and the wins of the races that she won, and not only did she run, oval tracks or dirt tracks, but she ran road courses. She ran land speed. She has land speed records. She raced in so many different genres of racing in different vehicles and without even ever being in them before, and was able to go out and win on her or set a record on her first time.
I think one of the things that she was extremely shrewd about, and this is not like the other women who were racing at the time, she chose for her long-term partner. It's pretty clear that she must have married him at some point, but it's been hidden away. But her long-term partner was a man called Marcel Mongin, Mongin. Now, Mongin was a brilliant driver himself and racer and mechanic. And wherever she went, Mongin was at her side. So she always had this backup there. And I think it was probably from Mongin himself that she learned a lot of her technique. Because it's a very good question that Mark asked previously, and I can't really answer it adequately, is how she acquired this extraordinary talent for speed. And that, I don't know. I think we just all have to guess. But she obviously just had a gift that was extraordinary.
Well, as they call it in racing, with all the racing she did, the prolificness of it, seat time.
That sounds right to me.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. One of the questions that Ginger wanted me to ask you was about inspiration, mentorship. And we typically on this show, I did back in the day when it was fully my show, but Ginger's nice enough to invite me back for some of these shows here, is to ask about what we call a driving inspiration, somebody that has been an inspiration to you and a mentor. But I want to twist this up if you'll allow me. Both of you ladies, if you'll allow me to do this. I always throw curves at everybody. And that is, if you think about this extraordinary woman, if you think of her as an inspiration to you, which obviously she's become as you wrote this book and learned more about her, what was the most influential part of who she was? Maybe this is an incident, or maybe you wish that she could still be around to talk with her. What was the most influential thing you learned about her that you felt like because you mentioned that she taught you things in the writing of this book?
I think I would give two examples of, I have to always come back to the fact that what she taught me was courage. Be brave, look forward with hope, but don't ever let the bastard, get you down. And I hope it's okay to say that.
Yes.
Well, the first occasion is not one like that. It's not about don't let the bastards get you down. It's a terrible tragedy that happened to her in mid-career, 1936, she was invited out to Brazil to race there. And she took with her new lover, who was much younger than her, unbelievably handsome, and I think quite a difficult character, Arnaldo Binelli. And I'm mentioning Arnaldo Binelli because he had with him a video camera, and he filmed the race in which she was up against, and forgive me, I've forgotten the name of Brazil's great champion at that time, but he was sort of like the Novellari or what. He was the man who must not lose. And it looks as though at the end of the race, there was just a possibility that she was going to win. And somebody in the crowd didn't like that. And they threw a bale of straw directly in front of her car. And Arnaldo Binelli caught on screen, and if you go out to this Musée Mac Singen exhibition, they have the film playing. You can actually see it happening. He caught the moment when her car hit the bale, going flat out. She was probably going, I don't know, 100 miles an hour, 120, nothing to us today, but this is different times, different cars. And the car plowed right into the crowds and killed over 20 people. I think something like 38 were very seriously injured. And in this film, you see the terrifying image of this little figure cartwheeling through the air. And that is Helle Nice. Well, she went to hospital in Sao Paulo. And here comes the moment I really admire her for, because she did get compensation. They knew that bad things had been done there and that she might have lost her life. And when she came out of the hospital, she never really was quite herself again, I have to say. She went on racing. She took part in all kinds of remarkable things, won more hill climbs and trials and every kind of thing. But something in her spirit became much more volatile, which might explain why Binelli later left her. But when she emerged from the hospital, there is the most wonderful photograph, which I have in my book, of Helle Nice, bless her, all kind of swathed up in the most gorgeous, enormous fur coat. Maybe it's leopard skin or something like that. Probably was the same old leopard skin coat she was wearing in Nice back at the end of her life, who knows. And her hair is up in a sort of rather wonderful red and white scarf. And that's, by the by, what I look at is the look on her face. And it's as though she'd just been told she'd, I don't know, won the race at Monte Carlo, she'd won the lottery, whatever. She has this smile that just radiates joy at probably what was one of the worst possible moments in her life. That's courage.
No doubt. You know, Ginger, I know, is going to ask you a little bit about maybe future books are coming up, but I do have one other question for you, and that is challenges. And when you're writing a book about somebody who's in the past and history, there's all sorts of challenges that come your way, no doubt. But what was the biggest challenge that you faced in writing this book?
Two challenges. One, as I mentioned, was actually finding her, which was, I mean, it just meant a lot of footwork and led to kind of ludicrous occasions. Like once I'd nearly found where she lived. It was near Chartres. And I was so tired, I got as far as Chartres. And it turned out there was some big French festival going on there. There was nowhere to sleep that night. So I ended up lying on a bench in the park until a policeman came and flashed his light in my face and said, you know, you can't sleep on this bench. And I just burst into tears and said, I've got nowhere to go. And he said, we'll sort you out. He took me to the police cell and they put me in the nicest little police cell with blankets and hot coffee and everything.
Oh my gosh.
And I had the best night of my life. I could, well, in that particular situation, the best night you could hope for. So that was quite an adventure. So one big challenge was actually locating her. A second challenge was rescuing her. And I'm proud to say, in the end, with a whole army of Helle Nice's friends who'd read the book and fallen completely in love with her, we finally got her buried with a splendid great board saying who she was in the family graveyard, where the family had believed what Louis Chiron had said about her being a collaborator, and they'd refused to have her buried in the family grave. So that was a moment of pride. And the other thing that was the biggest challenge of the lot was learning to drive a Bugatti.
No doubt. Marvelous. Love it.
Fun too, though.
This story just goes on and on and on. There's just so many things in the book that we could talk about and make this a 3-hour show. Miranda, please share with us what you'd still like to accomplish in the next chapter of your life.
Wow. I think it's a very easy answer because there are so many amazing women out there to write about that all I want is all the years of life and all the energy of Helle Nice in which to find and write about them. And if I can have that, I will be happy.
You talked a little bit about a car that you got to drive. Tell us a truly special car, bike, or truck in your life, or share a great memory or experience you had with that vehicle.
Let's think. I've told you this, coming off the, I've told you about the Bugatti Royale, so that's the story. Okay, gosh, cars in which I've had an amazing experience. 2 very different cars, 2 very different experiences. The first one was a boy I met when I was about 18. And the only reason that I was prepared to go out with him was that he had an AC Cobra. And we were at that time staying at a house party in Norfolk, and he wasn't all that handsome or amusing or anything, but he had this car that was just devastating. And I said, will you just take me really fast around Norfolk is full of tiny little lanes and twisty hedges, all that kind of thing. So I just asked him to take me as fast as he could around all these really dangerous roads. And it was such fun. It was rather like this Helle Nice moment of when I was driving her Bugatti. I knew he was a very good driver. And I'm afraid the relationship didn't last beyond the pleasure of being in his AC Cobra. But it was the only time I think I went out with somebody specifically and only for their car. The other car memory is a very different one. It again involves a boyfriend. This was a very delightful, very portly gentleman. I used to tease him and call him the Pasha because he had this wonderful kind of, what can I say, front to him. He was sort of built like a very tall man with a cushion in front, which is relevant to the story. So you have to pick a very, very tall, charming, giggly man with a cushion in front. And he was sitting in my little deux chevaux beside me. He was my passenger. And I guess he was telling me one of his funny stories. And I got laughing and I didn't look where I was going. And we went smack into the side of a lorry. Now, a deux chevaux is very cheap because it's built like a Christmas cracker. It just concertinas up. There's nothing left of it. Mm-hmm. By all rights, I should have been dead. But they have a kind of spring top that bounces back and then you're out in the air and the sunshine's coming in. So when we hit the lorry, the top reliably sprang back and out the Pasha and I popped, rather like Helle Nice. We cartwheeled up into the air. And guess what? I came down on
his cushion.
I came down on the cushion. And he was kind of rather bruised, not all that thrilled by this. I was very sad that I had completely lost my deux chevaux. But thanks to the cushion, I'm here today.
Well, maybe it is healthy to have a little bit of a tummy sometimes, right?
Certainly in that case.
Yeah, that's hilarious. So that's a hard story to follow up. We like to play car psychologist here at Cars Yeah. And I want to ask you a question I'm hoping no one's ever asked you before. And that is, if you were reincarnated or manifest as a vehicle, not what you want to be, though. That's way too easy. This is, if you look at the woman in the mirror and you relate who you feel you are as a vehicle, what would you be and why?
Do you know what, Mark? I can actually answer this one in a heartbeat. It's so easy.
Oh, good. Okay.
And we're back with Bugattis. Jean Bugatti, Ettere's son, who was one of the great car designers of all time, I'm pretty sure he designed the Bugatti Royale. But the most beautiful car that he ever designed is the car. I'm not saying that if I looked in the mirror, I would see myself as this. This is what I would like to see myself as. It would be the Atlantique. And the Atlantique was built with a chassis that was deliberately designed to reflect the curves of a woman's body. It's the most sexy car on earth. And I have been in one, and it is absolutely beautiful. It's luxurious, it's graceful, it's elegant, it's companionable, it's everything I would like to be. So I don't want to be a Mini. I don't think I want to be a Deschavaux, but just let me be an Atlantique and I'll be very happy.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I believe you're right. Ettore Bugatti and his son Jean designed the Royale. So there you go. You got that one.
Oh, good. I'm glad I got that one right.
Got that one right. So let's go on the ultimate drive here. I'm a bit of an enabler as Ginger is learning to be here on Cars Yeah. And this is how we play this game. We're going to put you in any car in the world. Don't worry about the price. We're going to write the check. We're going to put you anywhere in the world. And this is the fun part because cars really are about the people. We're going to put anybody in the car with you. You could be driving or the passenger could be driving. So what's the car? Where are you going to be? And who are you going to be with?
This is going to be so embarrassing because I'm just going to sound like I cannot get away from this subject. But how can I not say that I would be with Helle Nice,
of course,
sitting in her Bugatti? If you want to change, if you're fed up with Bugattis, I can very sulkily switch over because she drove an Alfa Monza later. Ooh. But I don't really want to be in the Alfa. I want to be in the Bugatti. But what I would love to be doing is to be with her at Montlhéry, which was one of the first speedboats ever built in the world. And that's where in 1929, she beat the world record in a Bugatti. And I've been at Montlhéry rather cautiously, very nervously, creeping around at no speed at all, praying I'd just survive the whole experience. But what I would like is to be driven by her that day in 1929 when she beat the record. That would give me incredible happiness. And then we would come out of the car. We would go to a little, maybe a little sort of bar nearby. She did like a drink. And she would probably freshen up her lipstick and look around to see which cameras were looking for her. And if they'd gone away, I could get her to talk to me just a bit about all the questions you've been asking me. I would like to say, Helle Nice, how did you learn to drive so brilliantly? Where did you get this courage? And she would tell me.
Wonderful answer. I love it.
One of the questions, Miranda, that we ask to our guest is, what are some of the ways that you've helped others or given back? But before you answer this question, I want to give you a little bit of personal history of what the Bugatti Queen and what you did for my own racing adventures.
I'd love to hear that.
I had not driven in almost 30 years a race car. And I had read your book. And what was interesting is in 2020, I was at a land speed race with a client that I was representing. And almost like Helle Nice, he offered for me to go drive his car, knowing that I had done it 30 years before, but hadn't raced anything since. And, here's someone, similar to Bugatti's situation of, this is a very expensive car and I was really nervous about it. But I thought about Helle Nice in that moment when he asked me that in your book. And I took the chance to do it and thought about the courage that she had and that, I could have the courage that she had. And it made me say yes. And I set a land speed record on my first run. And so I want to thank you for this book because she is who I thought of when I did that. So one of the questions would be, so you've seen how it's helped me, but I want to know, what are some of the ways that you've helped others or given back? And this could be in your life or your career field.
I love that you told us that story. It kind of leads into what I'm going to answer, because it's just so inspiring and encouraging, really, because it's very, very hard work writing these books. It looks like nothing. And I've got one wonderful friend who, the minute she hears I'm writing a new book, says, "And when's the launch party?" And I think, do you really think it's that simple? I just get a subject and then there's a launch party. And as you know, it's not like that. It's a very, very long and often very despairing journey. And there are so many times when you're writing the life of one of these wonderful women, you just think, I will never be able to capture her. I'm never going to get her voice. The voice is the hardest thing of the lot. I'm never going to be able to show the reader what it is that I love about this person so much. And that I was able to do that for you makes me incredibly happy. And that really is the answer. That is what I feel I was born to do, was to find these women, to celebrate them, and to put them out there in a way that other people can learn from them too, and that we can all take something from them that makes us feel we can do better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know it did me, because after I did that and set the land speed record, I was like, wow, maybe I could really do this. And I was in my early 50s. And, and I thought, well, you know what else can I do? And so after that, I got the courage to go and get my NHRA dragster pilot's license after that as well. And it really had turned my life around and to take the courage to do those things. And so your book has been absolutely amazing in my life. And I just can't imagine that it hasn't been that as amazing for others. So although you are a best-selling and very amazing author, I know that you probably read so many other things. Could you share with us a great book you've read, or an article, or a documentary, or maybe a movie that you viewed, or something else that you believe that others can learn from?
That's an interesting one. I think I'm not going to choose a car book, partly because I suspect that anybody listening out there is going to know way more about car books than I do. So why should I tell you what you already know better than me? So I'm going to choose something completely different. I will go back to when I wrote about the extraordinary Mary Shelley, who wrote one incredible novel, Frankenstein, which she wrote at a time of tremendous personal sadness. She started writing it in 1816 when she was living out on Lake Geneva with Lord Byron, with her lover, Percy Shelley, not yet married, and her deeply annoying stepsister, Claire Clairmont, who was having a big walkabout with Byron and got pregnant. So when Mary Shelley was actually writing Frankenstein, she was sitting rather miserably in genteel Bath in England, looking after Claire, who was going to give birth to a baby. Shelley, the absent boyfriend, had kind of scarpered off over the horizon for a bit. The bailiffs were after him. And she was there writing this extraordinary book, which is one that has become such an archetype that we can think of almost any situation to do with politics or religion or climate change or anything, and you can put the word Frankenstein in there and it will always fit. But funnily enough, when Mary Shelley wrote it, she had a completely different idea in mind. Her idea was, I don't know how many of you know the story, I imagine you know just a little bit, that Frankenstein is the creator of this artificial man he gives life to, who turns out, he obviously was a very bad designer, and he would not have lasted a minute with Ettore Bugatti, because he managed to design a man who was about 8 foot tall and composed of all the most sort of weird, different, unsightly limbs. So when his child was galvanized into life, Frankenstein gave a screech of horror and shot out of the door and rejected, as Mary saw it, his child. And to Mary, what she was writing was a book about parenting. During the writing of this book, she lost a half-sister who committed suicide. Her husband's first wife committed suicide. One of her children died. And she herself had known that her mother died giving birth to her. There was so much tragedy behind this book. And parenting was something she felt very, very strongly about. And Mary thought that Frankenstein had behaved like a complete rotter in abandoning his admittedly not altogether beautiful creation and just running for his life. And that was the lesson she was offering, was do as you would be done by. We will become what we are taught to be. Do evil to others and they will become evil. That was what she was offering. The creature isn't evil. He's actually rather sweet. He's always trying to help people. He just looks rather unsightly. But it's mankind who turn him because they treat him so horribly because of the way he looks. So it's a fascinating book.
We could talk to you for days and for days, obviously, here. I wanted to kind of part ways here. If you could leave us with some parting words of wisdom or a mantra of some kind that might help others that you felt has helped you.
This is very good timing. About a week ago, I was having a drink with a neighbor up the road who is called Yasha. And Yasha grew up in Warsaw as a child, a Jewish child, who was taught by some nuns how to pass as a Christian. And all of her family died. She came to England and she became an extraordinary force for good in the world of the arts at the ICA, at the Whitechapel Gallery, all sorts of places, and did remarkable things. At age 90, she still is. And what Yasha said to me this week about a friend of ours who is going through a very difficult time was this. It's really simple. Look forward with hope. So that's my mantra. It's really simple, but it's actually, if you think about it, very powerful. Look forward with hope.
Wow. This has a nice tie to one of my favorite quotes, which is from a South American racer, Ayrton Senna, who
yes.
The quote that he had was, I only see the future. The past is just data. So
I like that.
There you go. How can people learn more about you?
I think probably the best way to find about me is you can either go on YouTube and find quite a lot of interviews with me and things like that, or you can go onto my website, which is remarkably simple. It's www.mirandaseymour.com, and that links up to all my books and to this amazing family house that my family have had for 400 years in the country. So you can see beautiful pictures of that. No pictures of cars, rather shamingly, but there we are. I think those would be the two best places to look.
Excellent. I'll remind all you listeners that Ginger will put all of these up on Miranda's Cars Yeah show notes page, where you can find show notes about all the past guests on Cars Yeah at carsyeah.com. Just type in Miranda Seymour, Seymour, and you'll find everything right there.
Well, Miranda, I want to thank you for being so generous with your time today and sharing your experiences with us and with our listeners. And I'm really excited for your next book to come out. When do you have another book? I know you talked about it earlier, and do you know when that's coming out?
As far as I know, the publishers, who are HarperCollins, are expecting me to hand it in July. And I'm although I usually think at this point I'll never manage it, but I usually do manage to. And it's called Vera. It's about an extraordinary lesbian pioneering battlefield surgeon born in 1870 who became, much to her surprise, first she was a factory surgeon, then she was in the Russo-Japanese War, and then she went to work for the Romanovs and became the Tsarina's best friend during the First World War. And she ended up in Kiev, living with another woman. And there's an incredible picture of her. You can find it if you Google her, getting married to her beloved countess, with the countess in full wedding clothes and Vera wearing a man's white suit and a slouch hat. That's in 1925 in Stalin's Russia.
What a storyteller you are. This has been absolutely wonderful. And I really thank you, Ginger, for letting me sit down on this one again. And listen, I'm so glad that I got to meet you, Miranda. This has been absolutely brilliant.
I've loved it. It's been such fun talking with you both. Thank you.
Well, thank you both. And on that note, until we talk again, we will see you down the road.
Thank you so much for joining us here today on Cars Yeah. Drive on over to carsyeah.com to find today's guest show notes and inspiring automotive fun. Download your free copy of Filler Up. It's an ebook filled with gorgeous photos of fuel filler fun, including quotes from our inspiring automotive enthusiasts. While you're on the website, sign up for weekly blogs and a whole lot more. Download your copy today, and Ginger will see you next time here on Cars Yeah.